Welcome to Politics and Tactics. Today, we got a great show for you. I'm here. My normal host is not here today, who normally is the brains of this operation, but we have Josh Miller, past DC firefighter, currently on the rescue in New Haven, Connecticut, and he's also the owner of Signal 73 Fire Training Limited.
LLC. I mean, you don't have to put it. You don't have to put it in there.
You
get the picture.
He's a train wreck.
You get the picture.
But exactly. What's not a train wreck is our first guest. Now, our first guest has a new movie out, Hotshots.
Hotshots, not to be confused with Charlie Sheen's Hotshots. Correct.
But better.
Yeah, but better. Way better. Way better. Take two of these for the noise.
Okay. No. This movie, Hotshots, that I watch with my wife. Now, I'm an East Coast firefighter, so it actually, standing outside and spraying water on a garden is like not my thing. However, it held my attention the total time. It's sophisticated enough for a film critic, but yet common sense enough for the average day firefighter and average day citizen. I think it was a brilliant told, compelling story, and there's very few people who can say that they were up front for 6 years with hotshot crews and captured the footage that you captured. So, Gabriel, welcome to Politics and Tactics by Fire Engineering. If you can give a brief background of how you got here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So it was really simple. I lived out in fire country in Southern California, and there was a fire that popped off very near to my house. And so I just grabbed my camera and ran up the hill. And what I saw looked like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It was something straight out of like a surreal film. And there's nothing you can do but be impressed and overwhelmed by not just the fire itself, but also the firefight. When you have DC-10s flying straight over your head and dropping retardant, it's, with all the helicopters and the hand crews going direct, it's a really staggering thing to behold. And even though I grew up in California and we have a long history of wildfires, it's nothing new. I really didn't have a perception of what it was. I'd never really seen one up close like that, as close as they may have been to me. And so that gave me the firebug. Once I saw that, there was no turning back. And I immediately thought, okay, I got to go and capture this. And so then what I did was I leveraged California's very liberal press laws, where if you have a press badge, they allow you into any fire zone, like totally on your own, no restrictions. And I just walked into every wildfire that I could for about 6 years. And my intention was to follow the hotshot crews, because those are the ones who are up in the wildlands kind of doing the tedious work of trying to put this thing out by hand. So they're trying to put out the fire without water. And I just found them so compelling. They grow out these beards. They live out in the woods for 2 weeks at a time. And so it was a challenge trying to keep up with them, but that was part of the fun.
Did you train in order to be with them? Because normally when you see hotshots, it's only when they're on the side of the highway and they're able to catch that great glimpse. But your film captured them up on the hills, on the ridge, in really serious terrain. So did you prepare yourself for this?
Every day. So I did, what's called the pack test. I did that every single day. And that was my cool down at night before I went to bed. That's where you put on a 45-pound weight vest. And you got to hike 3 miles with a 15-minute mile pace. And then I would do their hotshot hike, the hike that they would do to break people off, to get people ready for the season. I would do that like 3 or 4 times a week, every single week. And I did all the same training that they did. I did S190, S290. So I learned all about their tactics. I did Hell Week with them, all of it, unofficially, but they're public lands. So if they're out there, I can go out there. And the thing is, unless I just wanted shots of the backs of their heads, I had to learn how to get faster than them so I could get around the front and actually see their faces while they're doing this work. And so I think that's part of the reason why it took so long, because it's just so difficult to keep up with these guys. It's like, keeping up with the Yankees. They're the best at it.
And there was a girl that was there that was putting some of the guys to shame. Were you keeping up with her?
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest tools is utilizing shame to motivate guys to go faster. And so I found that, you've got a whole bunch of alpha personalities. So the more that they can push each other, of course, all the trash talking is a big part of the culture, and that's what motivates everybody.
It seemed to me, and watching their training and watching the level of physical fitness and just intellectual smarts they have to have, there was no DEI on the hotshot crews. You're and I don't want to mislead the viewer until they see it, because often when they say that a film highlights a female firefighter, the woman in this film just happened to be female. She is a hotshot, and you can see that by the way that the crew treated her, They treated her as one of their own. She was there based off merit. Was that your take too? And when viewing this was a film about hotshots. It wasn't about overcoming this. It was about merit, being there and getting the job done right.
100%. Look, these aren't academics. These aren't paper fires. They're not sand table drills. There are real consequences to not being able to get up the hill. There are real consequences to not be able to hoist somebody on your back and carry them out of danger. And so the reality is you don't see a lot of women or weak people in this profession for a reason. And I think anybody who has their realist cap on understands why that is. Obviously, men are going to have a physical advantage in this field. And so if you are going to try to participate, you have to work 3 times harder than the fellas do, just at a baseline. But at the end of the day, like I said in the film, this is real life. It's not a gender studies class. So you can fantasize all you want about equality and all that, and that's great. Should certainly have equality under the law. But in terms of getting up the hill with 70 pounds on your back, if you can't do it, you simply can't do the job. And so the only people who are there are the people who can actually get up the hill. And so I like that sort of real world, analog, physical consequences to your actions. I grew up as an athlete. And so that to me was just normal. Like if you can't run hard, you're not going to make it. If you can't hit a curveball, you're not going to make it. And so I think that's how the real world operates. The more we get online, the more academic our society, leans, the more these kind of academic sand table drills kind of dictate how we perceive our reality. And it's so out of touch. This is one of the refreshing things about being around wildland firefighters is they're so connected. They're so grounded to real life. And honestly, it was a nice break away from all the technology, just to be able to go out in the wildlands, smell some cedar smoke, feel that burn of rigorous exercise. And honestly, I think that's part of the most appealing aspects of the job.
Yeah, no, I mean, and just you saying that, I'm thinking about how you're saying they're grounded and how they're, part of nature, and just part of, the environment. It's almost like they're like the crunchy granola version of like firemen. You know what I mean? Like they're very in tune with nature and they're very in tune with their environment. And that's just the kind of people they are. But one thing that interests me is that these hotshots, not only are they hotshots, but aren't they also structural firemen too? Like, don't they sometimes work at certain firehouses and they also go and do the hotshots jobs as well? Do they do both?
There's different agencies, and the people who I followed were the feds. And the thing is, the federal mission is just to protect trees. Correct. Now, of course, that mission has expanded, and they've had all these extra responsibilities put on them for life safety missions, but that was never their charge. You also have in California, you've got CAL FIRE, which is the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. They are an all hazards agency. And so those guys absolutely need to be able to work it. They got to learn how to throw ladders. They're doing structure responses. They're doing vehicle fires. And that is a part of their mission. Typically what you see some of the younger fellas getting into wildland, going with the Forest Service, having that adventure. They're a federal resource, so they travel all over the country. They go up to Alaska. And they have a lot of fun, but ultimately, because the pay isn't so great, they end up migrating over to the municipal agencies. And then, even as like 38-year-old men, they're now shaving their heads and becoming boot rookies, learning all the structure nuance and basically changing their career all over again. And this is a huge problem with the feds, especially in the previous 4 years. They hemorrhaged like 40% of their workforce. A part of that was attrition because of the bad pay. And then in 2021, the injection mandates purged like almost half of the firefighting workforce out of the agency because they were told you either take the jab or you have no job. And most of the guys were like, yeah, screw that. My life's more important.
Sure. I think your film captured that brilliantly, is that they manage trails unless they get killed. Then they're firefighters and treated as firefighters, but they get paid as trail managers, which is so wrong, because the rules and requirement of engagement for a CAL firefighter are so different and so much better. Quality of life, living conditions. These individuals aren't going on the fire line and for 24 hours and coming off 24 hours. In your film, correct me if I'm wrong, and it's okay to correct me. My wife does, he does all the time. But sometimes they're out there for 14 days or 7 days at a time, and they're self-supported. They have to be self-supported for at least 3 days, correct?
That's correct. Hotshot crews in particular, they have to be totally self-sufficient for 72 hours. So like no resupply of water, fuel, food, diapers, like nothing. You got to be able to be totally self-reliant. And that's the thing, a type 1 hand crew, a hotshot crew, they immediately stabilize any incident because they just have so much experience and they're so durable. They are sort of the best of the best in terms of wildland firefighting. And, beyond that, they can stay sometimes up to 3 weeks. They can have their mission extended for 3 weeks where they're out in the wildlands. And sometimes it's just sling loads from helicopters that are dropping meals for them. And they're just out there. They ain't showering. The best they have is maybe they dunk themselves in a river. And to your point, you were talking about the forestry technician designation, which is something that's haunted the Forest Service for a long time. They don't even classify these guys as firefighters, even though they're out there fighting fire just like anybody else. They're getting paid a third of what the other agencies, the brothers to their right and left, who maybe have a different colored helmet and they've got navy pants, they're getting paid way more. They're being called firefighters, not forestry technicians. And, one of the issues is the presumed illness designation. So, for a lot of agencies, if you get cancer after a certain amount of time, they simply presume it was because of your on-the-job duties. They didn't have that for the Forest Service. And what we're seeing now, like I said, you have this mission creep where, for example, on January 7th, when you had the Eaton fire in Altadena, the Hotshot crew that I followed in the film, one of their fellows, the whole crew had to go into the city during this urban conflagration, and they were trying to fight fire in the middle of all these structures and Teslas and solar panels burning, and they're sucking in, vaporized lead and cadmium and beryllium. They don't have SCBAs. Like, they all have beards anyway, so it's like they couldn't even do that in the first place. But they're doing a 24-hour roll, sucking in all this stuff. And one of the fellows on Texas Canyon, soon thereafter, developed a very aggressive cancer in his lung. And they believe it was because of that initial attack on the Eaton fire. And he's been out of commission for the entire season. But unfortunately, it's not considered a presumed illness from his job. And so now he has to do a fundraiser just to be able to pay for his cancer treatments and make up for the lack of hours on the fire line for the rest of the season.
That does boggle my mind, though, that they're not treated the same as, say, firemen firefighters that fight structure fires. Because when you think about it, these guys are laying their lives on the line, and they're doing it in forests for the trees, the vegetation, for obviously all the things that the feds send these guys out to do. They're doing it for all this stuff, where it's like, it's almost as if, it's almost as if they are, they're putting their lives on the line for, what some people would consider maybe less, like people being from, the Northeast or other areas of the country where we're dealing with structure fires. We're going in for victims. We're going in for property. We're going in for all these other things. These guys, they're not doing it for that. They're doing it merely for, for these other reasons. And, they should really be recognized for that as well, which is, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild that they don't have the same benefits,
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
It can be challenging sometimes to make the connection between how many structures they actually do save. Because if they're up in the wildlands and they're cutting a fire break and they're doing a tactical firing operation, burning off 10,000 acres, yeah, that ultimately does save the city. But there's not that like tactile sense of they were spraying water on the structure and they saved it, or they pulled somebody out and physically directly saved them. And so oftentimes, I don't think people really understand just how many structures they save. And, I've seen it firsthand where these guys were aggressive. They did a tactical firing operation and saved 24 homes. And then further on down the division, where they didn't do any firing and they thought a dozer line would hold it, the entire neighborhood got nuked. And what we see in California in particular, they keep putting homes out in the middle of the wildlands and they do nothing to get rid of the fuels. And everybody's always blaming climate change for the increasing fires. It really has more to do with the increased fuel loads because we got so good at putting out these fires. There's just more gunpowder all over the place. There's too many trees, and it's a fire-dependent ecosystem. So the longer we deprive the forest of fire, the worse these fires get because of that accumulation of fuels. So what ends up happening is these guys who used to be, maybe back in the 70s and the 80s, yeah, they were just kind of dealing with smaller forest fires and cutting line out in the middle of nowhere. And it was relatively lower consequences. Now, like I said, these guys are in the middle of urban conflagrations routinely because of how poorly California has been managed. And so, look, there's mission creep. The scope of the job has changed, and they need to adapt that. They're in the middle of trying to adapt the workforce, but ultimately they've already lost so many guys to attrition that it might not be recoverable in the Forest Service at this point.
And so we have listeners in all 50 states. So some of your terminology might be a little foreigner for like the East Coast. So you said fire, that they were firing. Can you explain what that is? That's burning a fire line, correct?
Yeah.
Can you kind of get into that a little?
So a lot of people will refer to this as backburning. And it's really this idea, if you've got fire coming at your community like this, You go right to the edge of your community, right to the edge of your fire line, and you set it on fire, because where you put fire on the ground, it's going to be lower intensity and it's going to burn away from the stuff that you don't want burning. And then the idea is you want your fire to collide with the main head of fire, and you're basically just removing the fuel out in front of it. Ultimately, all that hotshots do is they get rid of plants. That's it. So they either cut them or they burn them. They don't use water. They don't use retardant. Yes, they'll call in helicopters to help cool off a section, but their biggest tools are chainsaws, rakes, ironically, and drip torches. And they set this stuff on fire. And, you know, that term, fighting fire with fire, that's literally what they do 80% of the time. And it's one of the most effective strategies for getting rid of it. The thing people need to understand is these strategies also work prophylactically. They work as a preventive measure too. So when we hear the president talking about raking the forest, I know he said it in kind of a goofy way, but getting rid of fuels is quite literally the only thing that hotshots do. And it works to prevent fires in the same way that it works to stop these mega fires.
Now, something else that came up that was a little disturbing from your crew, and I know they say that the retardant is safe, but they said the same thing about Agent Orange in Vietnam. It seems they need to do a better job of coordinating how they drop it, because quite often in these films, they're dropping it right on top of them, and it can't be good. I equate it in a structure fire when you're on the truck and you got a hook, and the engine person just can't help themselves but get you wet. They can't just wait a second or move a little to the side.
Drop the ceiling first. Yeah.
So, I mean, you were right there.
Yeah, and I got hit countless times. I can't even tell you how many times I got painted by that stuff. And the thing is, ultimately, you know, I've heard of people saying that they felt rashes right away. I never necessarily experienced that, but we do know that this stuff is pretty toxic. It's certainly toxic for aquatic life, which is why they have restriction zones around riparian areas, because they don't want this stuff getting into waterways. But the thing is, it gets in there anyway. And this stuff is technically not legal to use. They have an exemption from a federal court due to emergency purposes. And the thing is, this has only been expanded. So they're only going to expand the use of retardant. The thing is, in Europe, they don't use retardant. And so out in Europe, when you see wildland fires out there, you'll often see those big yellow, they're called super scoopers, those big planes that will land on the water, scoop up water in their belly, and then they drop it on the fire. It is one of the most effective tools in the toolkit. And Europe leans very heavily on this stuff, whereas California in particular leans very heavily on retardant. It's a huge moneymaker. It is effective. It does work. But there are a lot of unanswered questions about just how toxic it may or may not be. And it doesn't seem like anyone's too interested in really studying it. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. But for the foreseeable future, I only see more use of it.
There also was something really interesting about your documentary that I thought was great. Is one, the unprecedented fire. You did a great job capturing the fire history of America before it was America. And we had two aviation experts on this show maybe a year ago. And the one thing you both had in common is you talked about the Native American Indians and how they had it right. Now, Americans, we romanticize Indians and we think they were all peaceful and they all loved each other. That wasn't it. They were a warring culture. They took slaves. There was sexual exploitation and they were great people as well. Okay. It was a mixture of everything. But the one thing that I heard nobody disagree with is they knew how to manage the forest. They knew how to manage the forest, and we lost that history. Can you speak a little to that? Because ironically, there's some people of Indian heritage that are great hotshots as well.
Not only that, is the original hotshots were Indians. And this is one of the things that we get into in Hotshot is the history of these guys. Look, my barefoot ancestors managed to live out in the wildlands for the last 12,000 years. And now we act as though we can't figure it out. And I love your point about, look, I'm Choctaw Indian, so I understand this idea of wanting to romanticize our culture, but ultimately they're just human beings, you know. And I think there's this overemphasis on really romanticizing that indigenous wisdom. The thing that people don't understand is they kind of just put fire on the ground with alacrity. They didn't really think about the consequences. They weren't necessarily worried about the chaparral ecosystem. They just thought, okay, this stuff, the last time there was a lightning strike, it burned down everything and killed half the tribe. So now we need to deal with it proactively. And it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to see in real time, within a few months after a fire comes through, even on the Palisades fire, if you go out to the Palisades now, the hills are all green. It's already all grown back, and that new growth is very lush and healthy. This is a natural part of the ecosystem. It's been around forever. This is the thing that we tried to chip away. I don't get into the climate change debate. The only thing that I say is, was there some magical time in history where we didn't have droughts, or we didn't have wildfires? Just point me to a year where you think it was better. If you think that CO2 is the control knob for wildfires, tell me a year, and I will tell you about a fire that destroyed people's lives. And as it turns out, the worst fires in our history were back in the 1870s. So this idea that we're dealing with some unprecedented menace, I think this is just the get out of jail free card for these bureaucrats who fail to do what our ancestors did, which is put fire on the ground every single year. The natural burn rate out west for California is about 4.5 million acres per year. That is a lot. Like the worst season we ever had in 2020 was 4.5 million acres. So I looked at that and go, yeah, that's a good start. And you'll notice the fires started dropping off precipitously after that because you have a lot of black on the map. And because of that, there's less fuel. So the reality is we need to put more fire on the ground. For some reason, California is so averse to doing it. Whereas when you look at Florida, they routinely put 2 million acres per year of prescribed fire on the ground. Guess which state has a wildfire problem?
Common sense public policy. Take care of the forest, take care of your people, and listen to the Indians. I mean, isn't that what California always wants? So here's a time they should be listening to the Indians 100%. They had it figured out. And like I said, the aviation individuals who are, because we've encroached on the wildlands and that fuel so much, they preach, we need rapid response. We don't even have aircraft that's actually designed, like a plane that's actually designed from the ground up for fire suppressant or carrying water. It's always an add-on to an existing platform. So they're advocating for quick extinguishment from the report of the fire, but they're also advocating that we need to do those prescribed burns. We need to go back to our ancestral ways and care for the forest, care for the animals, and realize that it's a cycle of life. And your film captured that. Where can our viewers view your film?
They can view it on hotshotmovie.com, or if it's easier, you can get it on Amazon Prime, Apple, Google, and Vudu.
The movie was brilliant. And like I said, did you have a couple close calls? Because your film looks like you focused on the hot shots and you focused on a couple individuals, but it was clear you were in some places that you shouldn't be. Sound familiar, Josh?
Yeah,
I was a chief in New Haven. Yeah. Anytime I was on a fire, Josh was somewhere he shouldn't be. So what do you call it?
Allegedly.
Was there any times where you were like, maybe I'm operating 10 feet past common sense?
Yeah, I'd say more than that. Look, the thing is, I did all the same training that they did. And the thing that the fellows would always tell me is like, hey, if we can be there, you can be there too. It's not like they have some, magical skin that precludes them from burning. But there were some close calls because ultimately you aren't in control. That was one of the most humbling things about being out there for so long, is you learn how little control we have over these things. This is why I'm such a huge advocate for, putting prescribed fire on the ground when you can. It's not that fire is the enemy. It's about the time and the conditions when that fire hits. So yes, those aviation guys are right. If it hits in the middle of summer with hot, dry, windy weather, you got to put that thing out. But then you have to follow up with that in the off season and do it when it's under your control. That's when we need that prescribed fire. But in terms of the close calls, I'd say there were 3 that were really serious. One of them, I honestly didn't know how I got out of it. So God must have had my back.
Well, what do you call it? It definitely shows. And like I said, I couldn't believe how compelling the film was. You should get an Oscar for this film because so many people, if you see a documentary, they spend a couple months with whatever they're doing the documentary. It shows that you were there for 6 years, and the stuff that you captured, you're just not going to capture in a month or a shift in a firehouse to see how a firehouse works. I mean, you captured the camaraderie of the unit, the dangers, and you brought some compelling public policy issues from forest management to the cancer issue that we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the show, is that we need that presumption because firefighters, not only from the hazardous smoke, you talked about Nomex. We know now that the firefighters' Nomex, so those hot shots are wearing, is just inundated with forever chemicals.
Right.
There's no nature-made chemical. It's made in a lab to repel water, but yet we know now it's getting in firefighters' bloodstream. So those hot shots need to be included in the fire service. And I know I didn't never mention this to you. It wasn't in the film. So if you don't have the answer, that's completely okay. But the Trump administration now is trying to do something new. When you look at an organizational chart for wildland fires, it's like a spider web like this, because there's so many different agencies that do the Department of Interior, the forestry, the firefighters, where they find a way to work together, but it's still so convoluted. The Trump administration is trying to put together a national fire service model. I'm hoping that after seeing your model, that in Washington, D.C., somebody will watch this film. I know I'm going to send the link once I get the proper link, and we'll make sure Mark hosts this to my friends at the Heritage Foundation and in D.C. But we should make sure that federal fire service, if it's not including these forestry technicians, they should be included. Can you speak to that?
Certainly. I've been very closely involved with a lot of these developments. And I will say that kudos to President Trump, because this is something that the wildland fire community has been screaming for decades. And nobody ever really tried to do anything. And frankly, it's a huge thanks to Senator Tim Sheehy, who's the first red-carded wildland firefighter to ever enter Congress. And so, of course, he's got the president's ear. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He was a former Navy SEAL. He's a fire aviator. He really understands this stuff. And it's thanks to him that they've been pushing this National Wildland Fire Service. It's going to be complicated. They're going to have to work out some of the kinks, but essentially what they're trying to do is consolidate all of these federal firefighting agencies under the Department of Interior. One of the biggest problems with the U.S. Forest Service is this is part of the USDA. So the same guy who has regulatory control over the frickin' food pyramid is on top of hotshots. That there are so many layers of ologists and bureaucrats in between DC and the boots on the ground operators that it's so convoluted, and you have all these ologists who are siphoning off the fire budget, which is 90% of the Forest Service budget, and they're not contributing, and they're not making good decisions. And the fire chief on the Angeles National Forest doesn't even have oversight over his own firefighters. So that has to go through like 2 other PhDs, the forest supervisor. Then it gets trickled down to his operators. So they need to cut all of this bureaucratic red tape. I think they're in the process of doing that. And if you can get a national fire chief directly under or even at cabinet level, I'm always telling people that wildfire is the biggest threat to our national security. You see just how easily somebody with a road flare can just go out on a windy day in Los Angeles and take out 10,000 homes like it's nothing, like it's a nuclear bomb. It doesn't take much to make this stuff happen, so it needs our attention quickly. If you wanted to incapacitate the entire state, all it would take a few bad actors with a couple of road flares, and it's that simple. So hopefully they get it done. This is the most progress that I've seen since I've been paying attention to wildland fire, and I know that a lot of the fellas in the industry are very grateful for the president and Senator Sheehy.
After doing all this stuff, did you ever consider now getting into the profession? I mean, after seeing all this stuff, being a part of it, did you ever consider it, or are you like, nah, I'm good with just video in it? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I'm very passionate about the subject matter, but I moved to the free state of Tennessee, and I married a kindergarten teacher, and now we're raising chickens, and we got a donkey, and we've started a completely different life. And so, I'm still advocating. What I really try to do is I try to bridge the gap between what the firefighters see on the ground and what the media tells the general public, which is absolute BS. You can only watch that for so long before you start getting a little upset and you feel, okay, someone's got to tell this story. Somebody's got to set the record straight and explain to people what is at play here. How are we doing things wrong? How is California letting people down? And we're losing the gem of this country. We're losing the finest natural resources that we have out in California, all because of poor management and bad education. So my goal is to try to spread the word best way that I know how.
Well, Gabriel, you came to the right place. We're going to have Mark put up the trailer. Again, tell our listeners how they can get so that they can go log on and see your film.
You can go support us directly at hotshotmovie.com, or you can stream it on Amazon Prime, Apple, Google Play, or Vudu.
All right. Well, Gabriel, you always have a platform here. We'll hopefully have you back in the future, maybe with the senator, and continue the talk on this conversation, because it's not going away. There's a unprecedented wildland fire every day in America. So at least that's what the news tells us. But definitely check out the film. You should get an Oscar for it. It was unbelievable. like I said, sophisticated enough for a film critic, but entertaining for a regular structural firefighter from New Haven or New York City or Detroit for that matter. So thank you for all your work and highlighting something so important. And Gabriel's in Mexico right now and took the time to come on Fire Engineering Politics.
Oh, that's awesome. We're
Tactics.
in Mexico. Where are you at? Where you go? Where'd you go?
We're in Cancun. We're right on the beach, brother.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
So he'll be
awesome.
So I'll let you go have a pina colada for all of us. But thank you for coming on. Mark, you can take him off and bring on our next guest. And Gabriel, look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jim.
How you doing, Frank?
Good. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right.
I told Jim to send me his bio, but the inner Scott Emmons of me would not allow me to read that because it was like your obituary. Scott said, absolutely not. But I got to tell a quick CV story. So Wayne Drapo, who eventually was a DC firefighter, but we both worked at Bethesda Chevy Chase together. And we were working on Ambulance 40. We got a call for a fire in Cabin John. Jim's father was the chief. And I don't remember if he was at the command post at the time or not. But of course, Wayne and I got there and said, instead of setting up the aid station, we went right to work and went and performed a search. So as you can imagine, the phone calls at BCC were ringing off the wall that Wayne and I neglected our responsibility. And Jim's dad stepped up, called me up and said, hey, Frank, I'm going to just nip this in the bud, and wrote Wayne and I a letter of accommodation. And awesome. And that was it. So your father was a stand-up guy, somebody I always looked up to. I had the opportunity to run into him at one of the iChiefs Eastern conferences. Scott Emmons loved him to death. And any opportunity I had to talk to your father, he was just a class act. I'm going to have Josh Miller, who worked with you a little bit, or at least in the same department, say a little bit about you. And then we're going to get into a true professional, Julie.
Yeah, Jimmy. It's a funny story. So the first time I ever met Jimmy was I was going down to DC to check out DC, and I was telling him I was getting on the job, and I'll never forget. Truck 3 was like backing in. He got off the rig, and he like looked at me, and he was like kind of sized me up. I was like, how you doing? You know. but I remember Jimmy for like just being on the job in DC, and it was some good times that we shared down there. I know you had it was a good time. So I think when I got on a job, your old man was still on the job, right? When I got it, he was still on the job. So yeah, it was cool, spending learning from you guys. So it was pretty cool. But let me get right into this. All right. So I'm going to talk about Julie Paidar, is the widow of St. Paul Fire Department Fire Captain Paramedic Mike Paidar. Following Mike's death in August of 2020 from AML, acute myeloid leukemia, Julie advocated to have the state of Minnesota recognize Mike's passing. As a line of duty death, it took over a year, but the historic ruling was the first occupational cancer-related LODD for the state of Minnesota. Precedence has now been set for others in Minnesota. Julie is currently advocating, along with Jimmy Seavey Jr. and other families from across the country, for federal benefits for first responders facing occupational cancer. Mike and Julie have 2 adult children. Their son Matthew is a staff sergeant with the U.S. Air Force, currently stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Their daughter, Megan, is a physical therapist, currently in sports residency at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. Julie is the did we already go through this? Sorry. Sorry. Frank wrote this. Frank wrote this out 2 times.
He didn't get out of elementary school.
No,
He's a fireman.
Yeah, well,
so.
Neither did you. So that just goes to show you right now. We already went that. All right.
Okay, Julie, it's an honor to have you.
Big honor to have you. Sorry about that. Frank
it's a beyond honor, and it's also an honor to have Jim on the show. I gave him a little hard time, but the fact is he's a firefighter, and most firefighters are courageous. There's very few firefighters that I know that wouldn't go down a hot hall that no one else would go, that wouldn't operate 10 feet past common sense or operate on a roof that's spongy. However, where we lack is in political courage. Firefighters won't risk their career or standing up for anything. It's such a rare trait. And the fact that he comes from a proud legacy of firefighters from the career and volunteer side says a lot. And Jim, I gave you a hard time, but I know for a fact your father would be proud of you. And the fact is, anytime I see political courage, it's tougher. It's the number one virtue from Aristotle is courage, because you can't have any other values without it. So by you helping out Julie, we really appreciate it. And the American Fire Service owes you and Julie a debt of gratitude. Julie, it's just horrible of what you had to go to, but the fact that you're speaking up for other firefighters with occupational cancer it's beyond compelling, and it takes a certain amount of inner strength that we don't see. So welcome to Politics and Tactics. Thank you for coming on the show. It was very interesting what Josh was reading about, that it was Minnesota.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, your husband was the first recognized line of duty death for cancer.
Correct.
If you don't mind being too forward, was he the first fire to receive benefits, or was he the first firefighter that passed it for other individuals?
To receive benefits.
So he received benefits, and here you are working your heart out on your husband's behalf, taking time away from your family, and sacrifices that of you're a doctor as well, right?
No.
Oh, I thought you were a doctor.
See, your writing's all wrong, Frank. Everything you got here is
I thought you were a
unbelievable.
doctor.
Yeah.
My daughter's the doctor of physical therapy.
Physical therapy.
So,
You're a mom. Never
I'm a mom.
underestimate a mom in America. But here you are. You're advocating for national cancer legislation. And we just were talking to an individual who filmed Hotshots for 6 years, who don't have the breathing apparatus. But it's not just about breathing apparatus, because firefighters outside are getting exposed to the products of combustion. And it's not the campfire smokes of when you were a kid. It's acrolein, hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen sulfide. It's just all methyl ethyl bad stuff in a chemical cocktail that firefighters are taking in. But we also have wildland firefighters with now the urban interface are experiencing that same type of smoke. And to make matters worse, another mom who brought an issue to front and center, Diane Cotter, who brought up the forever chemicals in our gear for firefighters on the wildland fires and structural firefighters, that firefighters don't have a choice. It's not as simple as breathing air. That is part of it. We need to make sure that firefighters are utilizing their air, but just wearing your gear is enough to expose yourself to toxic chemicals. Can you tell us about this legislation?
So the legislation right now that is currently proposed, it is the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act. So in the Senate, it's S-237, and in the House, it's H.R. 1269. The legislation that was initiated and proposed by Senator Klobuchar out of Minnesota, and she did that. I'd like to always mention that she did this as a bipartisan act. She reached across the river, and she connected with Senator Kramer from North Dakota so that she was able to originally initiate this as a bipartisan effort. And the legislation will recognize cancer as something that would be eligible for the public safety officer benefits. You'll hear about the PSOB. PSOB currently exists for some cardiac, some heart attacks, some strokes. Obviously, if you're in a structure fire, an accident, a horrific accident where you're killed on the line of duty. But with cancer right now, cancer is one of the leading causes of death among firefighters. And even with that being the leading cause of death among firefighters, it's not recognized at the federal level. So there are so many families that are not allowed that recognition of their fire hero being recognized, and then obviously being denied benefits that would help them and or their children, because there's educational benefits as well. So this legislation is really going to help correct that gap that has been out there for a while now.
Now, so currently the legislation, where does it stand? Where is the bill? Like, where's it going? What, where are we at?
Yep. A little history. It was initially introduced during the 118th Congress. It was introduced March of 2023. And we got so close last year. They were going to add it to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And at the last minute, it got pulled. So it was not part of the package. And this year, Senator Klobuchar reintroduced it again, January of 2025. So now it's part of the 119th Congress. And right now, where we are, it possibly will get added to the NDAA again this year. But I don't want people to just assume it's going to happen, because it might not. We still want people to reach out to their congressmen and women and ask them to support this, because this is I just have a hard time. To me, it's just common sense. Our first responders are there when anything happens. You guys know, just like you guys were talking about the wildland fires, natural disasters, floods, car accidents, unfortunately, mass shootings now. Our first responders are always there at a moment's notice. And then when something happens, why aren't our legislators there for them? That just, to me, it's common sense. And I wish, so to answer your question, it's not passed yet, but I'm remaining hopeful. So,
well, it makes total sense that the first responders would be taken care of, because I mean, these guys are putting their lives on the line. We talked about this in the last episode, or earlier in the episode. Everybody's putting their lives on the line. They're and not only are we breathing all this stuff in, but or we're exposed to all these toxins, but now they're obviously they've been finding out that our gear is no good for us as well, right? So they're telling us that our gear is also causing some cancer related issues. And just so you know, as like a little backstory about me, the cancer thing is very near and dear to my heart as well. Not because of me. My wife just had kidney cancer. She had stage 3, and thank God, she pulled through. But like the cancer thing is very near and dear to my heart, because my wife has cancer now. I think about myself, obviously, as a fireman, and being able to be there for my daughter, my family, and things like that. So it's very important to me as well. So I think what you're doing is just absolutely phenomenal, and I really hope that it pushes through. And what can us as firemen do, like boots on the ground? Like, what can we do to help you and help the cause?
Right now, my biggest ask is that people, firefighters, their friends, their families, reach out to their congressmen, reach out to your 2 senators, reach out to your representative. You can go onto congress.gov. I think it's /member, find my member. It's easy to go on there. Find your senators and your representative and write to them and ask them to support the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act. And the reason why I request that people either write to their congressmen and women, or set up a meeting when they're back home in your local jurisdiction, your area, is that it makes it real. It connects the stories. The firefighters, the first responders, police, you can give that personal connection to your legislator, and you can tell the stories. I'm pretty sure that every firefighter out there either knows someone that has had cancer or knows one of their fellow firefighters who has passed from cancer. And it's so near and dear to my heart, because it's devastating. It wrecks the family. There's a hole that is left. And for legislators to be able to hear that directly from their constituents who are firefighters or a loved one of a firefighter, to me, that makes the biggest impact. So I guess that's my request. And maybe Jimmy has something he wants to add on to that, but to be able to connect with those legislators and request that they support this bill.
Now, one of the things that you talked about was the Defense Reauthorization Act. So I understand that that's usually a good vehicle to get a funding mechanism in. Mm-hmm. But this is also a standalone bill. Mm-hmm. Has there been a committee hearing, a public hearing on this, where they've accepted testimony on this bill yet?
Not yet. The legislation did pass unanimously out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and so that's good. Right now we have 58 senators that have co-sponsored this. And so again, whether or not it goes into the NDAA, that's to be seen, like maybe as a manager's package to be part of that. But again, I wish we could just have this voted on and sent over to the House to vote on. But as you guys know, there's not many bills that are passed as a singular item. They're usually combined.
Correct. And I mean, it's just, if you could get a hearing, that might create some policy pressure where you have that testimony on Congress to help get it to the next step, because, this firefighter safety and health should really transcend politics. This should be a bipartisan issue. The issue being is the reality we live in is when your senator puts it forward, which I think is great, there's automatically a push because of just politics. So having 2 people from different parties push it equally can make a difference. And I think pushing to get it in the Reauthorization Act makes absolute sense. But at the same time, pushing for a hearing to create that policy pressure is there. Jim, what's been your experience with the International Association of Firefighters? Where have they been at with this bill?
So I just want to touch base with the two of you first. Frank, thank you for having us on the show. It means more than you can imagine that you were open and willing to have the discussion and bring up something, not just because it's politics, but particularly because this is something that touches all of us in a pretty deep way. Josh, obviously great to see you, brother. It's been a long time, and I'm very sorry to hear about your wife's circumstance. My thoughts, obviously, all of the survivors, and I'm sure the entire job and everybody on it is pulling for her to continue to do well with that. That's an incredibly difficult thing to go through, especially with young children. I don't know that firsthand, but I do know it from watching something that I'd like to talk to you two both about right now. And that's, I want to pretend that we're sitting at a firehouse table right now. And I want you all to understand the brevity and the length that I'm going to go to in explaining this to you all so that you guys can kind of feel the weight. This woman sitting in this call with us, Julie Paidar, is an absolute champion. She may not be a doctor, but she is a doctor's mom, and she's an MVP. This bill wasn't just brought forward by Senator Klobuchar. It was named after Julie's husband, Mike. She really doesn't bring that one up as much, so I'm going to be her biggest cheerleader with that. But not just that. The first year it was brought up, she not only flew to Washington, D.C. on her own dime, paid for her own lodging, but she also brought 50 survivors from across the country with her. So surviving widows, widowers, and their children, 50 of them. All of them came on their own dime with their own money, with no one paying their way, and they all got rooms at the same hotel. All of that happened because Julie organized it. I found out about this early last year, and I said, I can't believe there's someone else fighting this. It was almost like I found a lost group that I had been looking for a long time as I was fighting this and trying to advocate for the change as well, as you know, because my father wasn't afforded the benefits to date with the PSOB because it was a cancer death that we were working towards tying to a specific event, which is indescribably difficult to do. So last year, as Julie mentioned, it didn't make it through. It wasn't because of the bill's text or context. It was due to the fact that it was attached to something that was completely unrelated. It had nothing to do with this bill, and they had to pull it. So this year, what did we do? We reintroduced it. Senator Klobuchar was an obvious champion. She did a great job. It also got reintroduced, dedicated to Mike Paidar. I can't even begin to explain to you how much organization goes into this. This year, it even hit me a little harder because I had two brothers who died in the last 8 months. One being Rob Heaney from Rescue 2. He was a lieutenant. He had 24 years on the job. Notably, tomorrow will be Rob's 50th birthday. And obviously, Steve Shipp from Truck 7. He was a technician. He went through a very, very long battle with cancer and ended up dying. So this year it meant even more, and it got even more personal for me. Of course, Julie being the champion she brought back 75 survivors. Brought them all to the same hotel, organized them in the lobby, which I have to say was being renovated, made it a little difficult for everybody to speak, but Julie did a great job, brought everyone together, put everyone in seven different groups. So everybody was batched into different groups. And that leads me back to what you originally asked. The IAFF did assist us in scheduling meetings, and they had one representative with each group to be able to speak. The best way to describe it would be legalese or explain the nitty gritty that these offices would want to hear. I can't speak for any of the other offices, or I'm sorry, any other groups, but I know our group went to 11 offices over 2 days. Everybody walked in between the House and Senate office buildings, met with our senators, met with our congressmen and women, and explained our story. And right now, the Maryland, Pennsylvania, and partial Virginia delegation is sitting 5 for 8 with co-sponsors. We're trying to get to that 8. I'm wearing that one as a little bit of a challenge on my back, but this shouldn't be a big issue. This shouldn't be something So when you ask me how much have I seen from our fire service organizations, I'm going to tell you the exact same thing I feel from all of my brother and sister firemen. When I talk about this, I mean, last year I showed up and there were 3 other firefighters there, 2 of them being widowers. And I said, what is going on? Why aren't these rooms filled with firemen? These are survivors. I mean, they're survivors. And because they didn't get the federal benefit yet, we don't have people lining these rooms. What says more in a congressional office or a senator's office than having firemen and firewomen behind these people supporting them? That's what we said we were going to do. We never forget. So having one representative and having one firefighter didn't sit right with me. So last year I called my godfather. He came down on a lark. He's retired for 3 days. And for the 2 days we were on the Hill, he sat with me. And then the last day we kind of workshopped how we were going to do it this year. I called 5 of my friends the first day. Well, I told them a week in advance. And I said, I really need your help with this. And each one of them left completely appalled with how nobody knew about this and how there wasn't a lot of exposure to it. I explained to them, we don't really watch C-SPAN in the firehouse. We don't really stay in tune with a whole bunch of the stuff going on day by day on Capitol Hill, right? We're talking about my backyard. This is also something personal to me because my dad worked for DC Fire for 29 and a half years. So he was literally working in the shadow of this building. 10 of those years and 11 of those years for me, we were first due to the White House at 16 engine. So we're talking about, we're not going into these places and saying, hey, which party are you with? We're not going into these places and saying, hey, are you supporting us? No, we're going to help people. So you would expect the same. And I'm not saying we don't have a specific spot where we're reaching a lot of conflict or a little bit of strife, but we need more. If this doesn't pass this year, I think we're going to come back, and I want to come back with 3 times as many people. Mm-hmm. But until we do, we really need to focus on one thing and one thing only, driving the point home to our fellow firefighters and the survivors and their families that this issue touches every single one of us, right? Like Josh, I can't even tell you how, the hairs that went up on my neck when he told me about your wife. That's really, really hard. Is it going to have the same impression to a guy that's got, or a girl that's, 17, 18, just starting out in their career? Maybe not, because they really don't know yet. But once you have a circumstance like this happen to you, it changes everything for you. And I understand that, but sometimes it comes down to education, myself included. We have a responsibility to explain how important this is. This isn't just something that we're walking into a firehouse and it might happen to us. No, this is happening every day. To your point, Josh, it's in our gear. How much more exposed can you be? I've never seen someone say, hey, stop wearing your gear. And that's with my 23 years on the job, between volunteer and career, obviously. But 23 years, I've never heard someone say, hey, I want you to stop wearing your gear. Mm-hmm. We're starting to look at things like that.
This completely defies logic. First off, what do you call it? I would love to be celebrating the International Association of Firefighters and saying they're stepping up, and they have an opportunity to step up, because what they did just wasn't enough. First off, to have widows having to pay their way to go to DC, to be in a hotel and actually be the face of firefighters to better future firefighters, that's almost appalling, because here's the reality. And Joseph Stalin's chief of staff, it's credited to Stalin, but his chief of staff was the one who said it. You kill one person, it's a murder. You kill 1 million, it's a statistic. It's relevant to this is because if one firefighter dies from running out of air or in a building collapse, it's a tragedy that impacts and has that emotional appeal. But if you have thousands of firefighters with cancer, they view it as a statistic. The only way to get over that of being viewed as a statistic is to put a human face on it. And there's no one better than a widow that the bill's named after her husband and other widows. And it's a perfect time for firefighters to support our family. Our families support us. They sacrifice when firefighters don't make birthdays. They don't make the kids' events, the baseball games. They got to switch work. They got to run around to get there. And now we have widows that are willing to sacrifice more. They've already lost their husband. They lost their wife. They lost their loved one. They're willing to sacrifice more and go to DC from Minnesota and everywhere else in the country to make this better for other firefighters in the future. And Julie, you know, my heart's out for you. You know, it's just unbelievable the courage that you're able to sit here today and tell this story. But the IFF, step up. I want to be able to applaud you and be able to say, you know what, I was wrong about the IFF. They gave a little, but now they're doing a lot, and this is important and it matters. And I mean, DC, Fairfax, Montgomery County, Maryland, we're not even talking people from coming out of state. The one thing, DC is a real close community. If those unions just jumped on the back of this, each one of them can bring a bus full of firefighters, because it makes having widows and then firefighters in uniform really tells the story and creates that policy pressure that transcends politics. And I hate to say this, but in the political world, sometimes when an issue is just common sense, where both sides, where you get them one-on-one and they say, yeah, that makes sense. Those are the ones that are hard to create pressure, because you can't really make anybody a bad guy to say, I need to score points. It's counterintuitive, but if you get a bill that everybody agrees with, it's so hard to get press on it to actually move the bill forward, regardless of the bill. So the IFF could do a lot more, but also, you know, just like happened with the forever chemicals in our gear, it took a mom to basically embarrass the IFF. And now the IFF, to their credit, is doing the right thing. So I give them full credit. They're doing the right thing now, but they were dragged kicking and screaming like little kids, pulling them off to school, like mom pulling Ed Kelly and Harold Shakespeare off to school to do the right thing. And they're doing the right thing now. So keep up the policy pressure, but also reach out. You have a platform here on Fire Engineering anytime to put out word when you're doing an event, and I'll be glad to tweet it out and do whatever I can on my end. But reach out to those individual locals that are close, because there's no reason in the world that they can't help put this forward. And nationally, all firefighters should be concerned about this, because this is a national issue. There's not a fire department, no matter if you run one fire or 1,000 a year, we're all touched by cancer. And what I always say, what's the commonality behind that? You know, why aren't firefighters dying at a higher rate in DC, New Haven, Detroit, and New York City, and LA City than across the board? It seems if you look at the statistics, we're all dying at a higher rate than the general population because of occupational cancer. Well, we know the smoke's a problem, but now we know the gear's a problem. And that's a commonality no matter how many fires you go to in your career. And Jim, you said it brilliantly. Nobody's telling you not to put on your gear. We're telling you have to wear your gear. You don't have a choice yet. So what do you call it? We need moms like this. I mean, this is just heartbreaking. Julie, I give you the floor. Whatever you want to say, but to have a bill named after your husband, you know, it just takes a lot of bravery, and I appreciate you coming on.
Let me step in for 1 second, Frank, and I just want to let you know that sometimes Julie looks at me like I'm the bulldog that she has to keep on a chain, and that's because I'm three things that make me incredibly persistent and very adamant about things. One, I'm a fireman. Two, I'm a poli-sci major, so I like to argue. And three, I'm an only child. So let me explain. All three of these things make me very adamant. And when we go in these offices, I tell them this is ridiculous. But also, I take a little responsibility because I'm going in there with survivors and 2 or 3 firemen and firewomen. I mean, I completely agree with you. There's always something more that these associations can do. But I want to focus on, if we're going to call people out just like we would at a firehouse table in the sitting room, it's not just the IAFF. This was the lowest priority on the CFSI calendar this year when they went to the Hill. NVFC, National Volunteer Fire Council, IAFC, they brought a representative just like the IAFF did. They did have someone there, but they can do more. We have the big 6, the industry standard, fire sprinklers, Shane Ray, bring some people out there. This does not hurt a single part of our industry.
You're 100% right. And I think very well said. And the fact is, all these associations should be the top priority because we're all dying from occupational cancer. Nobody disagrees with that. So start advocating for your members.
Jimmy, let me ask you a question. So you go to all these offices, you talk to all these people, you're on the Hill, you're doing all this stuff. Julie, you're doing all these things as well. What's really, who's saying no? Like, why is this not happening? Like, I know obviously we've said it's not happening or it hasn't happened yet, and we're trying to work to make it. Like, what's the main stop? Like, what's that gap? Like, why is it not going through? Like, what's that main reason? Is it money? What is that main reason?
It's not sexy yet. It doesn't have the momentum. It's not sitting as an issue that's going across the thread lines of C-SPAN, CNN, Fox News, ABC, whatever 3-letter news ingestion you take. You're right. It should be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And this is good news.
Yeah.
It already has bipartisan support. Like Julie said, we have 58 bipartisan senators saying that they want this to go. Republicans, Democrats, and independents. The challenge isn't the opposition as much as the attention. Congress faces a crowded agenda, budgets, foreign affairs, national security. Bills like this get lost in the shuffle unless we keep them front and center. Some members raise concerns about cost. I get there's a broad recognition when a firefighter dies from cancer after years of service, their family deserves the same recognition and support as any other line of duty death. And that broad recognition starts right on the Hill. So what we need now is momentum, Josh.
Yeah.
There's no other way to say that. That comes from firefighters and their families keeping the pressures on. Their families include us. We say we're never going away. So they need to keep the pressure on, but not in an adversarial way, in a constructive way. Remind your representatives that this isn't about fairness. It isn't about keeping promises. It's about honoring the people who never asked what party you were from when you dialed 911.
Is there a website that we can link to at the bottom of this show?
Yep, so we'll provide that to you.
Yeah, we have our Facebook group that we can certainly, I can give you that link for that. And I'd be happy if you could share that.
We absolutely will. And Mark, the man behind the curtain who produces our show, will make sure that when this airs tomorrow, that Facebook link is there. Just send it to me in an email tonight, and we'll make sure we get it there. Is there a list of politicians from both parties who supported the bill on the website so individuals can see if their legislator is supporting it or not?
So there is not, but if you go to congress.gov and type in S.237 or HR.1269, so on the House, it's 1269, and Senate, it is 237. You have every single piece of information you could want. When your senator...
I'm going to bring out the chief in me. So, Jim, you're responsible. Send me the Facebook link and those two links. And when this airs, I can have Mark put that on the bottom of the show so individuals and firefighters can go to it for more information. I also want to let you know, on behalf of PJ Norwood and myself, who couldn't be here tonight, Josh did a great job standing in, even if he can't read. I still love him.
Yeah, well, neither can you. Neither can you.
That's
but
right. PJ's the brains of this operation.
I do want to say, Julie, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family, and seriously, and your husband's dedication to the fire service, and I really, I'm sorry for your loss. I really am, and you too as well, Jimmy. I know you've gone through a lot as well, and I really am sorry for you guys' loss. So I understand.
Yeah, and this story needs to be told, and
yeah.
This platform is open to you. So anytime you want to come on, if you're having an event, we record once a month. You're welcome to come on and say that we're having an event at the Capitol. We need firefighters. Let us know what's going on. Hopefully, the IFF, the I Chiefs, the Instructors Association, hopefully everybody steps up and starts making this a priority. And my one recommendation is reach out to those local unions as well. Get meetings with their presidents or their health and safety committees, and because that's a concentration of people that you can get there right off the bat at early notice. But Jim, your dad would be proud of you without a doubt.
100%.
And
100%.
Julie, you're an American hero. You're kids and your husband would definitely be proud of you carrying on his legacy. And the fact that you're pushing this forward for other individuals and other firefighters is so important. I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to give everybody the last word. I'll start with Josh. I'll go to Julie, and then we'll end with Jim Seavey.
I just want to say thank you, guys. Thank you for coming on the show, and it was great talking to you both. Jimmy, it's great seeing you as always. You know, I get to see you from time to time, and it's always good to see you. Julie, it was great to really to meet you and hear your story, and you know, just something to piggyback on. You know, and you talk about having people be present and having people be on the Hill. Just just hearing your story in this meeting, you know, that enough, you know, that brings something over me, and I think that will bring something over a lot of people. You know, the more people that hear it. I mean, without a doubt, you know, what you're doing is 100% the right thing. It's just, you know, fantastic on both of your behalf. So thank you again. It's good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Julie?
Again, thank you for having Jimmy and me on the show. It's great to be able to get our message out. And I'd be amiss to not just do a quick shout out to Local 21. And I need to be able to say that to you guys. When I went through the loss with Mike back in 2020 during COVID, and then having to go through that battle, it took over a year to get the Commissioner of Public Safety to recognize in Minnesota that line of duty cancer is a thing. It was Local 21 that, you know, people often say, we've got your back. Well, you're never forgotten. They truly stood up, and it was because of Local 21 they introduced me and my issue to Senator Klobuchar. So I just wanted to be able to get that out there, because it would be wrong of me not to let them have that credit, because here we are in the middle of the U.S. and they were like, we're going to help you, Julie. And then also just a big shout out to everyone that has been helping with our activism. It is not just me. It is a whole group of people, including Jimmy, and a bunch of compassionate people that are not in it for themselves. They are there to help others. And you couldn't find a better group to be a part of. So just want to say thank you.
Jimmy?
Frank, Josh, I can't tell you how much it means for you guys to have us on, and I mean that. It sounds like a bunch of political mumbo jumbo, but I'm dead serious, guys. It really, really means a lot to Julie and I. But on top of that, we need people to show up for this issue. We need people to look at this issue and see it. As I mentioned before, it's got to resonate with people, and I don't want it to resonate before it's too late. There's so much and so many people, so many brothers and sisters we've already lost. I'm afraid it's going to get worse, but at the same time, there's a way that we can protect ourselves, and we can protect ourselves for the future. We can protect ourselves for the ones that we have no clue are experiencing fights right now. But the important thing is that we have avenues like this, and we have conversations like this that sometimes are uncomfortable, but we wouldn't have that without you guys. And you pulled on my heartstrings a little bit, Frank, when you mentioned Scott Emmons. That was my mentor and one of my best friends. I could recite his cell phone number for you right now, and he definitely knew how to argue, and he never went away from any kind of fight whatsoever. So I definitely appreciate you bringing him up, and I know how close you two were, so I'm sorry for your loss in that aspect. But outside of that, yeah, this is an instrumental portion of our industry moving forward, and simply just getting involved. I mean, it takes 5 clicks with one of the websites we're going to provide to you all. It takes less than 2 minutes. Send an email. They're not going to blast you back with spam. They can't do that. Get the word out, and let's get it on the headlines.
And even if you look at the list and you see your senator or representative is a co-sponsor of this bill, send them an email to reinforce that as well. Julie and Jim, besides sending me the link, start working on an article about what's going on, what the history of the bill is, and I'll submit it for fire engineering. Let's see if we can get that published in the magazine or online to try to bring some more awareness to this. I'm going to ask you to stay on, and Mark, can you take us off? And that's it for Politics and Tactics tonight. Thanks for Josh Miller for stepping in.
Thanks for having me, Frank.